So, we recently covered the Wii U eShop, and that system is losing a ton of its library, but frankly, it's nothing compared to the 3DS. This system sold over 75 million units, and was born in the era we either made big HD console games or tiny smartphone games, and here existed a middle ground. Quite frankly, Nintendo has never lost more of its library before. There's so much in here. And I don't expect you guys to buy every game featured in this video, frankly there's too many. But hopefully, some will catch your eyes and maybe you'll find a hidden gem. Now there is so much in here, so I'm going to go pretty rapid fire and talk rather fast, so without further ado, let's dive in! The 3DS eShop wasn't just home to a well of 3DS games, but it's also the only official preservation of DSiWare. Native DSi consoles lost the store way back in 2017, but the vast majority of DSi software is still available to purchase on the 3DS eShop. This was DSi's second chance, and unfortunately its last. We'll go through these pretty quick, but here are some of the notable ones, just some. First up, Escape, known as 3D Space Tank here in Europe. If you're fairly deep into Nintendo history, you probably know of the Game Boy exclusive in Japan, X. This was the predecessor to Star Fox, and managed to pull off full 3D visuals on the Game Boy without any special chips. The original talent for both X and Star Fox came back 18 years later for this digital-only sequel, again published by Nintendo. This is a first-party game, the music's even in Smash. Everything from the original formula is back, only this time not at 3 frames per second. You'll fly through on rail sections, take full 3D control on the ground, and blow a lot of stuff up. This is a very important part of Nintendo and Star Fox's history, so don't miss your chance to get this one. The SteamWorld series generally ports its games everywhere, but the very first one, SteamWorld Tower Defense, can still only be found on DSiWare. It's a pretty simple blend of strategy and planning, but the steampunk and western fusion the series is famous for is just as cool here as it is in Dig and Heist. This game still holds up. A little bit of Dr. Mario, otherwise known as Dr. Mario Express in the States. Nintendo made a bunch of mini versions of retail titles, like a little bit of Puzzle League and a little bit of Brain Training, and they're not too essential, they're basically just very cheap demos. Although if you're one of the 3 people like me who has a shelf of Puzzle League, you probably need a little bit of Puzzle League as well. But the weird thing is, the DS never had a Dr. Mario, so a little bit of Dr. Mario is the only bit of Dr. Mario on the entire platform. And this is a completely original version built from the ground up for DS. One thing I really like is in Versus, instead of squeezing both the playing fields onto one screen, they occupy their own screens. That's rad! Did you know it's illegal for Nintendo-published DSiWare games to have the same title globally? Yeah, there's a little bit of Dr. Mario and Dr. Mario Express, but there's also Pioro, known as Bird and Beans in America, a WarioWare spin-off. It's a simple score-based game. Eat as many beans as you can, you score less beans if you eat them closer to the ground. But if you miss one, it completely destroys a tile, and that tile can only be refilled by eating a red bean, okay? It's really good! Do you remember Dark Void? Huh? Yeah, Dark Void, the PlayStation 3 and 360 title with a 59 on Metacritic. Well, Capcom made an 8-bit spin-off on DSiWare. And you start the game by blowing into the microphone as if you were blowing into a cartridge. This rightfully scored higher than the game is based on. You can still find this game today on Steam and mobile, but there's something so novel about playing it on an actual DS. While the base game still has some decent pros, it's mostly a forgotten game of its era, whereas this is legitimately very, very good. Flipnote is what most people seem to remember DSi for, and it's basically just a simple drawing tool to make flipbook animations, and even though that sounds small scale, people have made some incredible stuff in Flipnote. Bomberman Blitz freaking rocks. It's pretty much just Bomberman 2 DS's battle mode, but sold on its own, and given that game's going up in price, this is a great way to play. I love games that span across both screens, and it's so cool seeing these vertical Bomberman arenas. Plus, I know you always have parties with 8 friends who have DS's on hand, and this supports 8-player wireless. What do you mean, what's Aura Climber? This is a first-party Nintendo game, and even though it's not a sequel to Ice Climber, I think we can call them the Climber series. The iconic Ice Climber and Aura Climber. You basically just climb and latch onto these little grips. It can get quite intense and becomes a pretty cool little score chaser. Also, it's really cheap. You'd be kicking yourself if you forgot a Mario vs Donkey Kong game. This one's pretty similar to Mario vs Donkey Kong 2. You just shift parts of the level and get the little lemming mini Mario things to the goal. It may not be the most exciting series, but this was only the 3rd entry, and plus, Mario rips Pauline's dress in the intro. This implies she owns multiple of the exact same dress. I have a lot of memories with the original Rayman, and Ubisoft went ahead and ported the entire thing to DSiWare. It seems based on Rayman Advance, only with the bottom screen showing you slightly further ahead. But the big difference is... Yeah, whenever you get a checkpoint, the game takes your picture. Is it creepy? Yeah, it's creepy. Photo Dojo! Another first-party Nintendo game where you put yourself in the game.
Wait until my wife sees this! It's like somebody ordering Mrs. got a Hadouken! Don't worry, I'll pay for your funeral! I'll tell my wife on you!
Maybe Nintendo peaked with this. Oh baby, this one's important. I'm rubbing my hands together. Can you hear that? Can you hear that? This is Dragon Quest Wars, a Dragon Quest tactics game. Alright, you with me? Made by Intelligent Systems. Yeah, those guys, the Paper Mario and Fire Emblem guys. This is stupidly good. Each monster can move in different ways and has their own pros and cons, and it's legitimately a brilliant strategy game, and it only ever saw a release on DSiWare. If you're gonna get any game, this is pretty high up there, especially for DSiWare. The art style series from Skip, the Chibi Robo guys, was a big deal across DSiWare and WiiWare. One of my favourites was Acquia, a puzzle game spanning across both screens where you grab blocks from across the vertical tower and shuffle them out with others to try and clear lines. It's real good. Speaking of good, WarioWare Snaps isn't, but it is an exclusive WarioWare on DSiWare. This is played exclusively with the DSi camera, and there's only 20 microgames, so it's incredibly short, but don't worry, that time's extended by trying to get the camera to actually work. The game's telling me I'm too white. Games like Shantae Risky's Revenge fortunately didn't stay exclusive to the service, and other games like Plants vs Zombies did get a physical release on DS. But DSiWare was home to so many greats, and almost all of them aren't getting the attention they deserve. There's even 2 Zeldas that were delisted on DSiWare. Four Swords Anniversary was an entirely free download. This is basically the GBA game without a link to the past, and a bunch of new features. First of all, multiplayer is much easier now. You didn't need 4 copies of the game because the game was just free to everyone. But the biggest difference is there's a single player mode, which the original didn't have at all. There's only 2 links rather than 4, so puzzles that require 4 just kind of have blocks that you push. It's a cool part of Zelda history though, and you can re-download it if you've redeemed it before, but unfortunately if you missed out, you've missed out. But did you know about the Too Much Tingle Pack? This was exclusive to the Japanese DSiWare and got delisted in 2010. It adds a lot to the Zelda timeline, like Tingle and a hula get-up. There's also an alarm clock and a fortune-telling game. There's even a calculator, which is very generous given Nintendo sold standalone calculators on DSiWare. I spent £1.79 on this. DSiWare may not be what you initially think when you think 3DS eShop, but there is so much on here that shouldn't be missed. Anyway, that was just the starter. Let's go on to the main course and talk about the Virtual Console. You know, I wasn't all in on DSi originally, mostly because I was let down by the lack of Virtual Console. But this wish was fulfilled with the 3DS. Unlike Wii, this offered portable games in addition to NES. Super Nintendo games could only be played on a new 3DS because clearly it would be impossible otherwise. But still, a library of NES, Game Boy, and Game Gear is a big deal. And as someone who got a 3DS at launch, I was entitled to the Ambassador program. This gave us 10 NES games and 10 GBA games. They never even sold GBA games. I had some brilliant times with this Virtual Console. Donkey Kong on the Game Boy was a huge one for me. I bought this on a whim expecting a standard monochrome arcade port, but instead I found one of the best games I've ever played in my life. The arcade stuff is just a prelude to a much larger game. This is a 100 level puzzle platformer with an incredibly acrobatic Mario. It's probably the best game on the Game Boy, to be honest. This is also how I played the Game Boy Mega Man games, which are entirely different to the NES versions. And you know, this is kind of interesting too. Donkey Kong Original Edition. Check out the copyright, 2010. Back on Wii Virtual Console, they updated the NES port with the cut Pie Factory level. Some mistake this for an arcade re-release, but it isn't, this is still the NES game. But still, this is incredibly neat. Then there's this, the mysterious Murasame Castle, the sister game to The Legend of Zelda. It was built on the same engine and released only a few months after Zelda. Despite being a crucial first-party Nintendo game that's appeared numerous times like in Mario Maker and Smash and Nintendo Land, as of this video this is still not on the NES and Famicom Online services. It also never came to Wii or Wii U. The 3DS Virtual Console is the only place Mysterious Murasame Castle was ever released internationally. It holds up too, one of my favourite NES games. And while it's not strictly Virtual Console, Nintendo did give us the 3D Classic series. And you might just expect these to be NES games with stereoscopic 3D, but they are way more than that. These are by far the definitive versions of these games. I mean, these aren't even really ports, they're basically remakes done very faithfully from scratch. They're now native to 3DS, so Kirby's Adventure, for instance, runs like this on the NES, you know, lots of flicker and lots of slowdown. But on 3DS, it's smooth as heck. Smooth as a hex bottom! This is a completely smooth Kirby's Adventure with a 3D effect. That's so cool! And then Kid Icarus added flippin' backgrounds! Everything's just black on NES, but here they're fully drawn and even add context to the story. The further you go, the brighter the background gets, like you're getting towards land. Cool as heck! Excitebike is in flippin' widescreen! And if you shift the 3D slider, the field of view even grows. Look at this. Neat. But for whatever reason, Urban Champion was the star of the show. Unlike every other game, this didn't faithfully recreate Urban Champion, but instead made a 2.5D remake. It starts off kind of flat, but as soon as you go to the next area, it just turns on its side and it's like BOOM! 3D models! What the flip? There's also 3D versions of Twinbee and Xevious as part of this series, and while they're not quite as cool as the NES ports, they're still pretty damn cool. But yeah, this is it. 4 NES games and 2 other games. There was room for so much more, like Super Mario Bros. 3 in 3D, or Metroid with backgrounds, but instead, just this selection. Still, these are very special and exclusive to the 3DS eShop. Sega did a very similar thing with Sega 3D Classics. Many of these versions with their quality of life improvements made their way to the Switch on Sega Ages, but a bunch of them are still exclusive to 3DS. And even for the ones that are on Switch, the stereoscopic 3D is justified here. Seeing Sonic with all these layers is absolutely awesome, and I wish I could show you, but instead, let me just... Now, these were released physically, kinda. In Japan, there's 3 different volumes, but outside of Japan, only one of them got released. And if you want the full Japanese set, then maybe don't eat for the month. Let's quickly talk about Pokemon. This series has a legacy of being future-proof. Ever since the very first game, you could take your Pokemon from Gen 1 and bring them to Gen 2. There's been exactly one hurdle in the franchise's history, and that's GBA. You simply can't trade from Game Boy to Game Boy Advance. So Pokemon Red, Blue, Yellow, Silver, Crystal, Gold, at least on Game Boy, they're shut off from everything else. But before we get deep into this, here's how trading kinda works. So Gen 1 and Gen 2 cut off, that's fine, let's start with Gen 3. We catch a Zigzagoon in Ruby. We save our game? Okay. We then take our cartridge and put it in either a standard DS or a DS Lite. Not a DSi or 3DS, they have no cartridge slot, just these 2 systems. Now this is pretty important, you must have finished Gen 4 and seen all 150 Pokemon in the decks, okay? Then when you boot the game up, go to Migrate Pokemon, got it? Then go to Pal Park and physically catch the Pokemon that you're transferring from Ruby, okay? You with me? Now they're in Diamond, Gen 4, but we want them in Black, Gen 5. So for this, we need 2 different DS systems, okay? In Black, you have to finish the game and then go to Route 15 for the Poke Transfer Lab. On the other DS with Pokemon Diamond inside, boot up Download Play, okay? Now these 2 are connected and we do a dumb little minigame. Now Zigzagoon's gone from Gen 3 to Gen 4 to Gen 5. But now, we've got to go to 3DS. And for this, we've got to download 2 different apps from the eShop, and you've probably seen a problem already. So we need both Poke Transport and Pokemon Bank. Both of these apps are very special, especially Poke Transport. This is the only way to get Pokemon out of Gen 5, and also the Virtual Console games. So while physically Gen 1 and Gen 2 can't be traded forward, digitally, they can. This is the only way to bring 8-bit Pokemon forward. And while both of these gens were remade, that's not quite the same. Sometimes you're just in the mood to play the originals, and let's say you find a shiny, I don't know, Weedle. You'll want to bring that forward with you, and if you can't download these apps, you simply can't do that. But really, even the remakes are irrelevant to this because they will suffer the exact same problem. You can take Pokemon from Poke Transfer and bring them straight to Pokemon Bank, which in turn goes to Pokemon Home, which brings them to the Switch games. But it seems even though Bank is going free in 2023, any app, whether it's free or not, will be impossible to download from the eShop. Any demos? Any services? No! So absolutely download both Bank and Poke Transporter. Heck, download Dream Radar! This gets you exclusive items in Gen 5. It is a complicated setup, but to put it simply, download all of these immediately, or Pokemon from older games will never be able to be transferred. It's pretty much a soft reboot for Switch now. Legacy was an important pillar of the 3DS eShop, but it wasn't the most important part. There were hundreds upon hundreds of exclusive games made specifically for this service. So let's start off with one of my favorites from Intelligent Systems. Here is the Pull Block series, otherwise known as Pushmo. They made a whole trilogy of these, each with very different pulling and pushing mechanics. In the first, blocks can simply be pulled out 3 times, and using that gimmick you've got to try and climb a tower and reach the goal. But then there was full blocks, where blocks don't pull out, but instead you shift them around as flat objects. But then there was full blocks, and by full blocks I don't mean full blocks, I mean full blocks. This is more similar to the original one, but instead you're pulling blocks out of existing ones rather than stretching the entire tile, if that makes any sense. It's a small distinction, but makes for very different puzzles. Pull blocks and full blocks were sold as standard games, but full blocks had 7 free levels, with the rest sold as downloadable packs. It may sound like a simple premise, but all of these are some of the best games intelligence systems have ever made. You can even make your own levels, so there's an endless pool of user-made content to pull from. Wii U got an expanded HD version of the first game with Pull Blocks World, which is likewise going bye-bye. None of these have physicals. Level 5, the creators of Layton, Ni no Kuni, and Yokai Watch, had some really interesting eShop exclusives as part of the Guild series. Each game was completely disconnected and unique, and it basically just allowed influential Japanese creators a chance to put out small projects that just interest them. Suda51 and Grasshopper gave us Liberation Maiden, a game where you play as the president of New Japan and protect Tokyo in your giant flying mech. It does some impressive stuff with speed and scale for a 3DS eShop game, and you mostly just go around blowing everything up. But as a polar opposite from the guy who gave us Seaman, we have Aeroporter. This is more of a simple puzzle game where you raise and decline conveyor belts and get luggage to the right places in a time limit. But Crimson Shroud came from talent behind Final Fantasy XII, and this is a really interesting RPG. It's like a very literal adaptation of Dungeons & Dragons. Everything's taken seriously as if it were a big production, but the world and its characters are entirely static. They're just figures on a set. There's other tabletop elements like actual dice rolls for some attacks, but even outside of the aesthetic, this is a really good RPG. Then there's Weapon Shop Diomose, a game where you play as a blacksmith providing weapons to RPG characters, and the whole process of crafting is turned into a rhythm game. I like this one a lot. This entire set, Guildo 1, was sold as a physical release in Japan, but Guildo 2 is still stuck on the eShop in all regions, and that's a huge shame because this one had Attack of the Friday Monsters. This is flat out one of the most beautiful games on the entire system. You've got these stylized pre-rendered backgrounds with a bunch of moving parts, and it's simply stunning. If all this game was just running around a little Japanese town, I'd still recommend it to you. There's so much charming character sprinkled everywhere. You'll get to know everyone in town as you perform little quests and activities, and there's even a card game you can play with them, and if you win, you become the master, but if you lose, you become their servant. What makes this impactful though, is this quaint little innocent town is victim to actual monsters. You can see their marks from the beginning of the game with giant footprints and evidence of their existence. It's a striking game. It doesn't rely on 3DS features, so hopefully someday this gets ported, but it's not exactly a high-profile release, so I have my doubts, although it is currently charting on the 3DS. You know what? You guys are alright. Pokemon's all well and good, but I don't think Game Freak's best 3DS game was Pokemon. Their best 3DS game was Pocket Card Jockey. This mixes solitaire with horse racing, which I know sounds normal, and as we all know, it works. Sorting your cards is basically a method of storing energy, which then gets released throughout the race with a little strategy and positioning in addition to your solitaire skill. But this goes way deeper than any solitaire game should go. There's an engaging and funny story, and you can even breed your horses to get the ideal racer. This game has solitaire and sex. You hornos out there will love it. Another Game Freak title is Harmonite, a cool little rhythm game with an incredible style where you attack and jump to the beat. People keep going on about Pokemon games, but we're a Harmonite and Pocket Card Jockey too! We'll likely get another Ace Attorney trilogy in a matter of time, but right now we're about to lose the only ways to play Dual Destinies and Spirit of Justice in English. Unlike the Japanese versions, these completely skipped out on a physical release, and I know they're on mobile, don't write that comment. Don't write that comment! I just don't want to play on a phone. 2 major Ace Attorney games just going poof. Even though we can sleep pretty confidently knowing they'll probably come back to Switch at some point, it still sucks to lose the original versions. And speaking of losing, here's a franchise that does nothing but its fluidity. If you were around during the WiiWare days, you probably know about this one. It was one of the great hidden gems of the service where you basically play as a pool of water that you tilt around. Fluidity's Spin Cycle is a sequel that really went under the radar, and that's a shame because it does so much cool stuff. You're no longer a living pool of water, but rather a water spirit, so that adds a bit of context and character, and the environments are just far more interesting than the WiiWare original. Some people didn't love tilting their 3DS to control the game, and those people are cowards! It's been around 12 minutes since I last talked about Dr. Mario, and that's far too long, I apologize. Dr. Mario Miracle Cure is probably still the best way to play the series. Not only is there standard Dr. Mario, not only is there Dr. Luigi, not only is there the WiiWare Germ Buster, but there's also brand new optional items which are the Miracle Cures in the title. That's them! Here they are! If you just want raw Dr. Mario, it's here, and if you want something more wacky, you've got that too. Why doesn't Switch have Dr. Mario yet? It's been 13 minutes since I last talked about Flipnote, and that's far too long, I apologize. Flipnote 3D! This is Flipnote with a stereoscopic 3D gauge, so you can draw Sonic really far away, and in the next frame, he's really close! This looks terrifying. If you could see this in person, you'd be crying right now. But this was distributed by the devil as a My Nintendo award, so as of 2016, you can't get it anymore. Boo! Boo! Remember Sing? These are the guys who made Another Code and Hotel Dusk, some of my favorite DS games, and honestly made Nintendo's first-party portfolio way more varied. Unfortunately, no one bought these games and they went bankrupt in 2010. But that's not quite the end. The talent behind these games moved on to a small 3DS eShop game called Chase! Cold Case Investigations. It's like Hotel Dusk, another detective-led visual novel, and while it's not as great as their Nintendo-partnered work, it's still really cool seeing these guys do what they do best again. Don't expect a masterpiece, but if you're a fan of those games, this should be really cool for you. Let's do some rapid-fire Shinen. I love these guys. They're probably best known for Fast RMX and The Tourist now, but they did some amazing stuff on both WiiWare and 3DS. One of Wii U's launch titles was Nano Assault Neo, and thankfully this also came to PlayStation 4, so that one's banked away safe. But 3DS actually got a sequel, a more developed one, with Nano Assault EX. There's a full-on story to the game now, and everything's far more fleshed out. The Mario Galaxy-esque planetoids are far more varied, the 3D shooter sections go on for longer and feel more involved, and the boss battles have a lot more strategy and care this time. With the Circle Pad Pro or new 3DS nub, you get a lot more control like a traditional twin-stick shooter, but the face buttons work just fine too. Shinen also gave us Art of Balance Touch. Again, this was another Wii U game that shifted to PlayStation 4, but Touch has completely different puzzles. It's a simple physics-based balancing game that dates back to WiiWare, but there's a lot of fun in this simplicity. Do you remember Jet Rocket? This was Shinen's 3D platformer attempt on WiiWare, and they gave it another go on 3DS with Jet Rocket 2. There's a mix of traditional 2D side-scroller levels and more open 3D land attempts, and both work really well. It's not like phenomenal, but on a platform largely devoid of 3D platformers, this really stood out. Fun! Fun! Minigolf Touch! That's 3 exclamation marks in the title, so it must be good, and it actually is. Nothing too special, but a really rad minigolf game. Okay, different developer. Have you ever heard of HOW? They did a flip ton of eShop stuff. For starters, Koibi! Both Triple Deluxe and Planet Robobot gave us some really interesting side games that were a tad on the short side, but HOW decided to elaborate on most of them and give them full-on eShop releases. Derived from Triple Deluxe, we had Kirby Fighters Deluxe. Basically what if Smash Brothers were just Kirby. Different copy abilities, but still just Kirby. We also had DDD's Drum Dash Deluxe, a rhythm game where you platform from drum to drum and try and clap to the beat when you're in the air. I always preferred this one over Fighters. It's just so laid back, and some of these tracks are legitimately great. Then, Planet Robobot also gave us 2 games. Team Kirby Clash Deluxe was entirely free to play. You basically just fight classic Kirby bosses, but you do so either online or with AI partners. It was alright. But where it really got interesting was Kirby Blowout Blast, the first ever 3D Kirby platformer. In Robobot, this was a pretty simple arena-style like Horde-type mode, but they gave it proper levels this time, and while there aren't any copy abilities, it at least gave us a taste of what a proper 3D Kirby could play like, and we're finally getting a full-fledged version in Forgotten Land. Now these may just be elaborations on games we already had in Triple Deluxe and Robobot, but that's still 4 Kirby games being lost to time. But perhaps more important, Box Boy. Now Bye Bye Box Boy did get a physical release in Japan alongside an adorable QB amiibo, but the West got nothing, and this is stupidly expensive anyway. The gist is you play as a little walking box who can produce multiple other boxes. If the level says you can do 3, you can make a little staircase. If it says you can do 4, you can make a bridge. They get a lot out of such a simple idea, but then came Box Boy, which gave Box Boy another box. In the first game, if you try pushing out a box and then pushing out another, it'll despawn the first box, but no, not this time because this is Box Boy, so there's 2 boxes, okay? Bye Bye Box Boy was the last game in the trilogy, even though they made a 4th game on the Switch. And you know what? I actually believe this was meant to be the last game. They throw so much into this one. Tons of power-up boxes, baby box boys, and just a stupid amount of love and ideas. You can even play as Kirby characters. Look how cute DDD is! They may look similar, but each Box Boy game has its own distinct flavor, and each one is worth owning. Box Boy and Box Girl on the Switch doesn't replace any of these. Genius Sonority, these are the guys who made Pokemon Colosseum and XD Gale of Darkness. And on 3DS, they gave us the Denpermen. In this, you use your 3DS camera to capture little kooky party members roaming around in your room. They're always there, you just can't see them. And you take them to extremely Dragon Questy dungeons complete with extremely Dragon Questy combat. The influence was clear, but Denpermen was still very well received. And then Denpermen 2 polished things up a ton with a full-on overworld, making it feel less like a light RPG, and more like a legitimate full-fledged RPG. And then 3 takes everything that 2 did, but gives you more customization and just more stuff. Japan actually got a 4th entry, Denpermen 3, but it never came out overseas, and no game in the series has a physical release. When you think of 3DS Chibi Robo, you probably think of this thing, but there was actually a fully 3D game on the system that feels far more in tone with the original game. Chibi Robo Let's Go Photo, or Photo Finder as it's known in the States. Now the main gimmick of this game is you have a special camera that needs specific shapes around your house. So alongside all the Chibi Robo stuff, sometimes it will say, here's a circle camera, go find something that's circle in your room. Can you find a circle? This video is sponsored by Buxton Water. I mean we're not, but Chibi Robo loves it. Even though this is much more ambitious and interesting, it actually scored lower than Ziplash on Metacritic. Take this as less of a recommendation and more as a, hey, you can make Chibi Robo hold Sonic Adventure. Nintendo themselves put out a ton exclusively on the 3DS eShop, and we've already talked about a bunch of them, but let's finish off with more Nintendo first-party games. The Dylan series, Dylan's Rolling Western The Last Ranger, and finally Dylan's Dead Heatbreakers, which actually did get a physical release here in Europe, but unfortunately not in the States. These are all 3D tower defense games, where you roll around the map like a Goron to prep, and when the invaders come you do more rolling to attack them. There's a ton of great style to this. It's obvious why Dylan became an assist trophy in Smash. This is a great design. The Last Ranger is generally more of the same, and actually reviewed worse because of that. I don't know if it's actually worse, but it is just more Dylan. No major additions in this one. Dead Heatbreakers though is a proper evolution, and even though it didn't get a physical release in the States, you can tell it's a much higher production. It's great the series is still somewhat sticking around, but the first 2 games had such a charm to them, especially the first one being a defining early eShop title. And hey, I'm talking about Mini Mario again. Yeah, I was tired of this series too, but Mario vs Donkey Kong Minis on the Move was actually different and kind of interesting. These are full 3D dioramas where you switch out pieces on the fly to get Mini Mario to the goal. It's pretty cool. Tipping Stars also came to both 3DS and Wii U with a cross-buy promotion. And while all the global releases had a code in a box, the Japanese release actually had a cartridge. So this one may not be saved, but at least we have the basic-ass one. And perhaps not a big deal as these games are available elsewhere, but some of the most popular 2D indie games have really cool 3D effects on 3DS. VVVVV, Cave Story, Mighty Switch Force, they're all worth playing on this platform. In fact, Cave Story has 3 different versions on 3DS. There's the DSiWare release, the stereoscopic 3D release with widescreen unlike PC, and the full 3D remake that goes for quite a bit online today. And perhaps one of the biggest eShop games is Fire Emblem Fates Revelation. Now this does exist on a cartridge, but good luck finding it. It was only ever distributed in the special edition, which now goes for £300. You can get this as DLC for Fates, and essentially allows you to align with neither kingdom. It's an entirely new path. And you know, I'm not like a die-hard fan of New Super Mario Bros. 2, but I do feel that some of the best levels are in the DLC. They ended up with 30 entirely download-exclusive levels. And unlike the main game, some of these are legit challenging. You've got things like the Nerve Pack and the Impossible Pack. Do they sound easy? No, they're not, and you only have 1 life to clear 3 levels in a single run. Others are easier, but still pretty cool, like the Classic Pack. This remakes 1-1 from the first Super Mario Bros., 1-1 from Mario 3, which makes a lot of sense with the Tanuki Tale, and then 1-4 from the very first game again. Even if you thought this game was kinda meh, I think you'll find some of the best stuff Nintendo's ever made for New Super Mario Bros. In this DLC. We already covered this in the Wii U video, but Smash 3DS likewise is losing all its DLC characters. Cloud and Bayonetta will never appear on an actual Pac-Man stage. This does not count, this does count. There's some important regional stuff too. One of the best games on the entire system, Rhythm Heaven Megamix, didn't get a physical release in the US. It's eShop exclusive there, whereas in Europe, physical. Likewise, another one of the best games on the system, Shin Megami Tensei 4, didn't release physically in Europe, eShop exclusive here. And while Apocalypse did, it's basically Shin Megami Tensei 4 2, not an expanded version. I like this back and forth region thing. Picross 3D Round 2 didn't release physically in the States, but did in Europe. Rune Factory 4 didn't release physically in Europe, but did in the States. I haven't played the Style Savvy series much, but Don Koopman has always told me it's very good, and I trust his word. The States didn't get a physical version of the 4th or 5th entries. How are you living with yourselves? Right before the pandemic hit, I went to Paris with my partner and picked up a physical rare copy of Nintendo 3DS Guide Louvre. Remember this? They had a whole Nintendo Direct about it, and at least as of when I visited, the 3DS program was still going. They basically rent 3DSs in the Louvre and you use them as guides. You walk around, look down at your system, and it's like, whoa, it's the Mona Lisa. I can barely see it, it's tiny, but on the 3DS, it's large. I think they're still doing that. Anyway, this physical copy is for sure just a collector's item because the exact same game is on the eShop. You can visit the Louvre no matter where you are. One thing I wish I could tell you more about is Rusty's Real Deal Baseball, but unfortunately it never released in Europe. You tell me about this one. I've been speaking this whole video, it's your turn. And look, you and I have been thinking the same thing this whole video. Where's Nintendo Badge Arcade? Well, here it is. So this was a little claw game where you can grab little badges, and then those badges can go on your home screen. You can decorate them and make them look all nice, and it just makes your 3DS home screen feel like an actual home. Unlike the Switch home screen, which feels like icons. To finally finish up, we can't forget Street Pass. It came with 2 packing games on a system level, Street Pass Quest and Puzzle Swap, but 11 others were sold as DLC. We had stuff like Mii Force, an official Nintendo Mii shmup, Flower Town, a much calmer game about building a garden with the help from Miis you find. Warrior's Way has these giant scale battles, and there's stuff like Monster Manor, where you explore a house, and through Street Pass hits you get new rooms to explore even further. That's just 4 examples, there's freaking 11! And a lot of these were made by different developers too, like Grezzo and Goodfeel and Spike Chunsoft. Gosh darn! I actually lied about this being the end. I don't think you can get this anymore, but Twilight Princess Picross was distributed as a My Nintendo reward like Flipnote 3D. Thanks, Midna. Okay, so that was the end. Wait, what's that sound? Oh no, it's not a white guy rap, is it? Layton vs. Lawyer is £50. A Falling Project crossover is going out of bounds. If you want Persona Q1 and Q2, pay the same price as this canoe. Rhythm Thief's a game that I really like a lot, but over in the States I really think I'd rather not. Radiant Historia got remastered. Why does it cost this much, you bastard? Yoko Watch series is mostly quite cheap, but Yoko Watch 3 is making me weep. I'm a big fan of Cave Story 3D. What the hell, the base game is free on your PC! And if you want to play FE Fates, the best thing to do is sell all your mates. Go on, Derek. Go to eBay. And you know, I've been pretty selective with this stuff. I only touched on games on a surface level, and there are so many digital exclusives we didn't even mention. And plus, all the physical games that were preserved in price, games like Soul Hackers and Persona Q, are stupidly expensive online, yet on the eShop, like Soul Hackers is what, $8.99? That's so cheap! It is disappointing, but I don't want this all to just be seen as doom and gloom. Hopefully you've seen games today that interest you, not because the eShop's closing, but because legitimately, they interest you. That's what I want. So, thank you all for watching. This has been a long journey, and if you haven't already, check out the Wii U video too. But anyway, until next time, bye everyone.